Okay, welcome everyone from all corners of the world. Thank you for being here this morning. It's great to see you all. I'm looking forward to diving in together on a session on activation in the body and how we work with it. And for those of you who've been around the Leadership Dojo for a while or around the Strozzi Institute for a while, this is a topic that we talk about often. And what I'll say is that my intention for this session is to give us a chance to continue to study this for ourselves. If you're brand new, it'll be an opportunity to get kind of an introduction to how we think about it here at the Strozzi Institute. And again, if you've been around for a while, really a chance to kind of deepen your knowledge, your understanding, but also deepen in practice. And when we thought about why this particular topic now, no surprise as we're still in the midst of a global pandemic, as there's a lot that all of us are facing in our lives at this moment, we really felt it would be a useful time to come back again to this topic. Certainly in the context of times where the stress is higher, where pressure is higher, where there's more going on, we're just more likely to be reactive or to experience aspects of activation in our lives. And then really our question is kind of like, what do we do with that in the body? And one of the things that we hold is that it's a really human experience to have that as part of what's happening for you. But then also, and I present this in part in honor of Women's History Month and kind of on the heels of Black History Month, to be in this conversation also about how what we might be experiencing in terms of activation can be amplified, can be, there can be more going on if we're also, for example, folks who may be part of different groups who've experienced systemic oppression or discrimination over time, that there's both kind of the usual human experience of that, whatever that is, right? We might say usual, but then also the various groups that we're a part of and how our experiences as part of those groups might be kicking things up even further for us at this time. So during the session, we're going to be looking at some somatic practices, both to help us better understand what's happening in the body from the perspective of activation, and then also how to either recenter out of that, or in some cases, really how to honor it, how to go with it, and how to let the activation teach us what we may need to learn or experience what we may need to experience to further heal or to further come forward in our lives. If we haven't met yet, I'm LeeAnn Mallorie. So I'm one of the lead teachers here at the Strozzi Institute. I've been in and around the dojo since about 2007, studying and also teaching the work. And I spend my time outside of the Strozzi Institute running a business called Guts and Grace Leadership, which is a women's leadership and empowerment organization that really focuses on helping women. The way I like to talk about it sometimes is dismantle the patriarchy that they've embodied inside of themselves, or how do we actually step out of gender shaping towards something that's more powerful, towards the goals we have in the world. So that's my work beyond SI. And inside of the Strozzi Institute, I teach in the context of EL1s and also a lot of organizational work. So this is how I'm here with you as a teacher here at SI. The goals that I'm holding for our session today are to help you all, again, continue to deepen your understanding of activation, increase your capacity to work with it in the body, in part by understanding some of the body markers of activation. How does that actually show up for you, not just as kind of an overwhelming experience of something's going on, but really specifically, because the more that we get to know the specific places that activation shows up in the body, the more we start to have markers and doorways to find our way back home to center, or to just know, hey, I'm off, something's up right now. Already that can sometimes be a revelation. Often we miss that if it's a lower grade kind of activation. And then to give you just a little taste of where it comes from, kind of what's the root of that, or what's that look like from the perspective of our earlier lives or our earlier careers. And if we have time, also work with a technique to blend with versus fight activation, to really trust that it's wise and to see how that can be so in the body. So when I thought about kind of the initial tee up, or just a little background to offer you here, what I wanted to say is at the Strozzi Institute, we hold this idea of working with activation in the body as a core leadership skill, and also as a core life skill as well. So being able to notice if we've kind of been thrown off center, or something has come up for us that has us activated, that has us not fully maybe present or centered or at our best, for example, inside of our own skin and inside of our own lives. And, if you think about kind of why you showed up today or what that looks like for you, you can just take a moment and kind of consider, well, what is that? What does activation mean for you? For example, right, it can be like in a meeting, in a moment when someone accuses us of something or says something that maybe we don't relate to or we didn't do, and we have this experience of feeling angry or tweaked, or our blood boils, and there's a certain sensation of that. Maybe there are thoughts or feelings that go with that. Or maybe, for example, you need to give a talk. In these days, it's probably on Zoom, right? But you get on stage to give a speech, or you turn on the Zoom and you're standing there, you're sitting there in front of the computer screen, and suddenly you feel numb and you can't think. And there's a sense of like kind of being frozen, and maybe there's a sense of anxiety, for example. So these different moments of activation, or you're walking down the street, or you're in a grocery store line, and someone makes a comment that is a racial slur, or that in some way kind of puts you on edge, or you feel is an affront to your own dignity or your own experience, and you feel whatever happens to you in that moment inside of your body. So this is really kind of the backdrop here. And part of what we say in terms of why this is a core leadership skill is that, and in those moments, right, when that's happening for us, completely human, but also there are often moments where we maybe make the next move that happens, or the next thing that happens is us not being at our best. Maybe we say something we don't mean, or we have an experience there of losing access to all of our wisdom, maybe the training we've cultivated over time in our leadership. Suddenly we do something that isn't what we would have hoped we would have done when we were at our best. So a question I want to pose to start us off this morning actually is, what % of the time would you say that you are at your best? What % of the time would you say that you are not experiencing activation, thrown off your game, under pressure, having these experiences, but really you're like, no, I'm grounded, I'm centered, I'm present, I'm here, I'm able to access my full capacities as a leader or in my life? Just curious. A mentor asked me this once, and it was useful to kind of consider, how often am I more in that kind of at my best state versus, say, in a more activated state. Beautiful. So looking at the chat here, Sue says 80%. Awesome, Sue. I see 25%, 75%, 50%, 80 to 90%. Someone says never at my best, 30% of the time. 90% of the time, 80% of the time. I hope that some of the folks who are saying 90% are folks who've been practicing SI work for a while. Great, 8%. Good. Okay, so food for thought, right? What % of the time are we at our best versus, say, having a different experience than that? Thanks for weighing in. So the question is, if we want to work with activation, come back to center, be at our best, how do we do that? And in terms of the way we think about this here at SI, that there's a couple different phases of that, one being aware, and then also being able to make a move that might support the recentering or the coming back in. I wanted to reference for a moment, for those of you who may be new, or for those of you who've been around, just kind of a counterpoint to what we're up to here. So some of you may remember a couple of years back, a Harvard researcher, Amy Cuddy, taught us the power poses. So she taught us, really that if you stand in a certain way, your cortisol goes down, your confidence goes up, and then you may have this experience of being more powerful or feeling more powerful, and feeling more confident, and having folks potentially also assess you that way. And what I want to say is that work really, I think, is like the tip of the iceberg of what we offer here through the SI tools, that if you do X in your body, you'll get Y result, and that'll be better. So we might say, for example, that's kind of a hack, or a particular practice that may change something for a moment, or that may take you to an experience of getting a different kind of result. But really what we're interested here is kind of a layer deeper. So rather than working on the body to make a quick tweak and then have a different experience, part of what we're curious about and what we teach is that there's a way to really work through the body where in fact the self represents, and the self is housed inside of the body and that most of us have particular patterns, habits, ways that activation will show up for us, ways that our own experience of being off of our game or being pulled into something that's other than us at our best will show up. And that that's pretty custom, actually. That maybe, for example, standing like this and taking up more space will be a great recentering for you. For example, if part of how you get activated is to shut down, pull in, and collapse. However, on the flip side, if part of what happens for you when you get more activated is to become more alert, to open up, to kind of take up more space and poof out in that way that might represent the power pose, doing that pose, for example, might just send you further into the very activation that you're experiencing. So part of the practice and part of the game is really getting to know on a much more personal level what's so inside of you about how activation shows up, and then about what the medicine or what the practice might be that would support you to have a different experience. And we have a question. It's not clear when you use the term activation, does that mean being at my best or being triggered? Not to be, sorry for the confusion there. So activated meaning any experience of feeling emotion, sensation, heightened experience in the body or in your skin that's typically more feeling thrown off or not at your best. Okay. So just coming back here. Okay. So as we have these experiences as younger people or currently ongoingly in our lives, the experiences, we would say, we shape ourselves to meet those experiences. So something happens that's challenging. For example, we may develop a certain kind of way of being in our own body or our own skin that is protective or that helps us to get love, belonging, connection, dignity, these kinds of things. And as we grow up and we move into the world and we learn leadership skills, build new capacities, become more resourced, some of that shaping still remains, but also it happens to be that in moments of stress, in moments of pressure, in moments of challenge, we can return to them. Or we can become triggered or become activated in a certain way that is either representative of how I was in that experience, or maybe in some way is taking me back to that experience. So in the work of SI, we speak about what we call a grab, which is that moment when something catches you, something, perhaps we use the expression because it comes from the martial arts, like if someone grabbed your arm, what might your body do at that moment that would be a response to that? And when I think about activation showing up during this time, right, in a time of great stress, pressure, stress, in the time of the global pandemic, what we may be experiencing is different moments of things catching us, grabbing us, pulling us off guard, and then having that experience in the body where suddenly I feel like, oh, there's a lot going on in here. Maybe I'm feeling a lot of emotion, or I'm feeling off center in some way, or I'm feeling, for example, that I'm thrown back to maybe an earlier state that would have been representative of that. This kind of a grab or sort of returning to an earlier state or strategy, this can happen in part when, for example, a norm from your shaping or comfort zone is challenged. So I'm supposed to be this way. This is sort of the norm that I grew up in as a woman, for example, in a certain kind of context. And I'm pulled out of that, or I'm asked to be that. That can put me into a state of activation. Or also if something gets replicated from an experience that happened inside of one of those sites or contexts. Or just when I'm under pressure or at my edge. So all of these different kinds of ways that we get activated are normal, are human. And then we might say, depending upon what's happening in the world, you might experience more like a double or triple whammy. So at this moment, for example, it's like I have a lot on my plate. I'm going to work. There are things I need to do. And by the way, also, there's a lot going on from the perspective of racial justice. And boom, boom, suddenly I have both the normal things that I'm holding or the workday things that are being held, plus things related to a social context that I grew up in and am managing, and then suddenly there's a lot going on. So that all being said, what I want to do is give us a chance to actually get more into the conversation and the practice of it. And let's go ahead and do this. Let's see. To kick us off, take a moment in the chat and just share, and this will also help, I think, for folks who are still making sense of this, and then we're going to feel it versus talk about it. What are the ways that you already know that activation shows up in your body? So under stress, under pressure, in a moment when something gets triggered or something is asked of you that's challenging, what are the ways that activation shows up in your body? Okay. Ellen says shoulders rise, chest tightens, Leroy. Shallow breathing, wanting to run away. David says, I feel hot. Gil says anxiety. Tira, increased heart rate and defensiveness. Christina says tears, chest constructs. Beautiful. A sense of narrowing, says Tori. Okay. Good. And a lot of you already have a lot of distinctions around what happens very much in the body in that moment. Betsy says, I freeze. I get very rational. Feel a spike of adrenaline, says Katie. Okay. Okay. So we're going to take a couple of moments to do kind of a self-study practice. And this really will be an opportunity to get even more information about how activation shows up and what that's like for you. When we're inside the dojo, when we're meeting live, sometimes we'll do this as a partnered practice, and we'll do a practice where we actually ignite activation in the body through either sound or through touch. We're going to do not that today because it's a little harder to do on Zoom, and also because I want to give you a chance to kind of explore your own different dimensions. So in a moment, we'll stand up and we'll take a few moments to explore some of the different ways that that can get carried in the body. And what I want to invite you to do as we do that is to really check for, hey, this is kind of familiar. This is what's so for me, this resonates with, and then what else can I notice there? Or this is not so much a way that it shows up for me. This is something that's kind of different or isn't exactly my MO, but you can practice kind of putting yourself in another person's skin. Let's take a moment and go ahead and stand up together. Okay. And as we stand, just let yourself kind of come into more feeling here versus thinking. Allow yourself to feel your breath, to feel your body. Good. And yeah. And for just a moment, you allow yourself to imagine, sense, feel yourself back into a recent experience where you felt activation in your body. So just taking a moment to feel, okay, that happened. You can kind of call it back up in your mind's eye. Choose an example that's not the worst thing that's happened to you all month. So maybe not like a 10, but something that's more like a 5 or a 6 if you'd like. And through intention and through remembering and through feeling, so you can let yourself feel just kind of what that produces in your body. And just take a mental note. It may be subtle. Here's me in more of a state of activation. This is what starts to happen. And as you do this, just taking note for places in the body that you feel that. Something may feel tight, something may feel looser, more dense, more porous, more open, more closed. Good, and then take a deep breath and let yourself relax out, down, soften. Okay, I'm going to give us a chance to do a little self-study around the 4 dimensions of the human body and of center. And really here, the practice is going to be to let yourself feel for, oh, this is part of what my body does, or this is not part of what my body does when I'm more in a state of activation. So I'm going to take a moment and work first with the length. We also call this the dignity line, the top of the head to the bottom of the feet. And just take a moment and feel yourself standing upright in space. And then try on here for a moment what it's like to collapse around your length or your dignity line. So if you let yourself kind of give up your length, maybe dropping your head a little, shoulders may be rolling in, could be collapsing the chest or bending the knees. Kind of letting yourself feel, oh, this is a certain kind of shape, a certain kind of experience. And then just checking, feeling into this snapshot, this way of being in the body. Is this familiar? Is this part of what happens for me when I'm more in a state of activation? If not, that's okay. Just a chance to study one version of the story. And if so, go ahead and let yourself notice, maybe even exaggerate it just a little bit. What's so about this? What are the body markers here? What gets tight? What holds? What pulls in? What lets go? Yeah. What's it like here? Good, and then go ahead and take a breath. See if you can let that go. Come back to more of a neutral state. And let's take a moment and still working with the length, the top of the head to the bottom of the feet, this dignity line. Let's take a moment and try on a different version of off center in length. So try on now overreaching, maybe trying extra hard for that sense of dignity. I'm going to get even taller. Maybe I'm pulling up. What's it like to be overextending, to be working extra hard for your dignity? And again, notice, is this a familiar shape or experience? Does this seem to touch in or tap into that place that your body goes? Maybe you can exaggerate it just a little bit to get familiar with it. This is one version of the story. And if it is familiar, just noticing what are the different markers here. What else is going on? And go ahead and let that go. Just taking a mental note if you caught something maybe that you haven't noticed before about what that shape is like, what that state is like for you. Good, and then let's do the same thing around the width or the side to side of the body. So here we say an at-rest, centered, present, open, connected human body might have a certain kind of width, a certain openness. We'll talk about this as the social domain. I'm contactable here. And let's take a moment to really research the experience of being pulled in or giving up with. So when we're activated, we might have an experience of getting more narrow. You can let yourself just try that on without necessarily wildly exaggerating, but how might you do that under pressure or, yeah, good. Letting yourself feel, how does your body do that? What's that like? Does that hit a match for you in terms of where you go when activated or not? If not, just trying on a different version of the story here. And if so, how does your body do that? What's that like? Where does the tension get held? What closes, what opens? Good, and then see if you can let that go, relax back out a little bit. And then we'll check out the opposite. So for some of us under stress or pressure, when we get activated, we actually take up more space. We get wider. We either space out or we extend, overextend, hold everything, get bigger. So in your own body, see if you can try that on. What's that like? And does that feel familiar? Great. And that may not feel familiar. Then it's kind of walking a mile in someone else's shoes just for a moment. What could that be like? And if it does, how does your body do that? Is there anything additional you can learn here from this practice, this experience, this moment of trying it on? Wow, not only do I extend my boundaries, but also I tighten my chest. Interesting. Yeah, so whatever that may be for you to notice right now. Good, and then let that go, coming back to something that feels more like neutral. Taking a couple deep breaths. If we're playing hard, it can be intense to try these different states, these different experiences on. So letting yourself come back, part of the practice. Good, and then let's take a moment to study the depth, which is the front to back dimension for us of the human body. And let's go ahead and start for a moment in the back body. So there's many ways we can do this, but just for a couple of things to try on. Some of us will, when activated and under pressure, under stress, we start to lean back or pull back. Maybe pull away from the front and into the back. And so let yourself try on, what's that like in the body? If I pull back a little bit, lean back, how do I do that? If you know this is your MO, this is part of what happens when you get activated, really let yourself study that a bit more deeply. Here's how I do it. Wow, I knew that I leaned back, but I also tuck my chin, or my hands also get really tight. Or yes, I pull back, but I also get more narrow. If that's not your MO, just kind of feel into, oh, this is what it's like for maybe someone I know, a coworker, my spouse, my kid. Good, and then let that go, coming back. And when activated, some of us will go the other way. So perhaps leaning a bit more forward, getting ahead of ourselves. For some, this might feel more like confronting or leaning in. Now let yourself try that on for a moment. What's that like in your body? If this feels familiar, exaggerate it just another 1 or 2%. How does my body do this move? What are the body markers? Yes, I lean forward. Also, I curl my toes, for example, or I don't breathe, or I get hotter. Good. And then go ahead and let that go. See if you can come back. Okay. Good. And then lastly, we'll do one piece here around purpose, or the fourth domain of centered present awareness. And let's do it this way. So taking a moment just in your own body, in your own skin, and in your own intention right now to let yourself be, feel you when you're on purpose. So that could be letting yourself connect with something that matters to you and then feel, let that shape your presence, let that live in your way of being here in this moment. Could be everything from a declaration if you're working inside of this work, or something that matters at home or at work. How are you when you're there, when you're connected to that? What's that like? Good. And then let yourself, again, to study. Sometimes when activated, we'll lose contact with that. So maybe checking out of what matters, or again, pulling away from it in some way, dropping our connection to it. So without needing to know exactly how, just let yourself take your purpose away, or take what matters away, and notice what that's like. Some of us may go the opposite direction. We'll just try this one on for now. Good. And then coming back. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and pause there. We'll come back together. So we'll have time for more practice momentarily, but let's come back together for a moment. And if you'd like to share in the chat, what did you see for yourself here? What else did you learn about how activation may show up for you in the body, or what your body may do under pressure, stress, and these kinds of moments? And specifically, if there was something around either of those dimensions. So in my length, I tend to go here, or in my width, I tend to do this. Or in my depth, front to back, this was the more familiar thing for me. Kaj says, shrinking in my dignity line happens a lot. Dawn also said, surprised that I shrank in length under pressure. Kate, that dignity line is so powerful. I shrink a lot externally and internally. Carolyn says, I observed in more detail what my body itself was doing, not just how it feels emotionally. That's something I relate to a lot. It's part of why I wanted to tee up this study. Me personally, my earlier experiences of beginning to work with and understand activation, it was like a lot of emotion. And there were also things that were happening in the body that really enabled that emotion, or even overemphasized that emotion. And it was through starting to pay attention to the body markers as well that I was able to start coming back in and having more to work with. Robin says, collapsed in rigid in both directions. Someone with an iPhone 6S says, I go into fight mode. Irina says, narrowing felt really familiar. Andrew, different types of activation. I lose my width when one-on-one. When I'm in a group, I move backward in depth. Beautiful. Ezra says leaning back was relaxing. Yeah. So go ahead and take a moment. Yeah. And if you haven't done this already, some of you it looks like are, but go ahead and take a moment and take a couple of notes for yourself along those lines of length, of width, of depth. What did you see there? And if again, you've done this before or you're already familiar with yourself in those, is there one more nuance that you noticed or could capture here? One more place in the body to look or to be aware of, given what we just studied? Betsy said, when in purpose, I felt open, focused, breathing, deep, strong, and flexible. When out of purpose, collapsed and more distracted. So why do this study? Now we have some information. Maybe we have more information than we had before. Part of what my hope is for you all is that by doing this study in a moment when you're not actually in the experience of activation, or maybe you are, I shouldn't make that assumption, but while we're doing it as a study or as a practice, that the next time or times that you experience activation, one way of starting to work with it, of course, is really just to bring your attention back to those places. Okay, let's see, is this what's happening? I've had the experience through my practice, through my exploration, through my somatic study, that I know I'm getting, that I know I can tend to get narrower. That feels familiar. Ooh, am I getting narrow now? And from a centering perspective, many of you know we teach inside of the SI work a body-based basic centering practice where we come back into our full presence in those 4 dimensions. So we come back into more of a centered length, a centered width, and a centered depth, front to back, and also back into connection with purpose. And being able to notice, even in the very early stages, oh, something's up. I'm starting to move into more of a state of activation. I can tell because I've gotten a little bit more narrow, or I can tell because actually my length line has started to collapse, can be the beginning of reminding ourselves to do something more like a basic centering practice. So that's one way to begin to work with this, or to continue working with this, right? I've been in this work for a long time, and I continue to find new places to look in terms of where this is showing up in my body. And sometimes they're more obvious, I just hadn't noticed them, and sometimes they're even more subtle. But being able to work with that particular distinction can become a path of working with activation over time. Certainly we go more into studying this, getting to know this, and learning other ways to work with it in the context, for example, of our EL1 course. I'm just going to take a quick scan to see if there's any questions before we move forward. Okay. Okay. What I want to give you, however, is one more practice and one more puzzle piece for today. We teach it a little bit less, and I think it's also important. So if we think about having an experience of activation in the body, sometimes the first place we can go is I need to recenter. I want to recenter, meaning I want to come back to presence. I want to come back to my best, most resourced self. I want to come back to being connectable and available again. And that's good. We definitely want to learn how to do that. And sometimes, in particular, when stress is high, pressure is higher in this kind of a world we're in right now, sometimes it's also not the only move that's needed, or not the best move to make. Meaning sometimes our activation is speaking to us, and we want to, or we may want to, honor it in a different way. We may want to learn from it, or we may want to not just go to a different state, but really give it a chance to show us what it needs or what it may have to offer us right now. So we have another practice that we work with here at the dojo, which is called the blend. And just like it sounds, it's very much a go with, or get involved with, or honor or be with kind of a practice versus a change it kind of a practice. And when I think about, kind of why this practice or why this kind of a practice can make a difference, one of the first things that comes up for me is that sometimes I just need to have a good cry. Sometimes putting myself back together is exactly what I need to do to go make the next move in my life, lead something, engage with a client, for example, do work I need to do. And then sometimes what's happening in terms of the activation in my body needs me to go a different direction or wants me to listen. And from a leadership perspective, I think that's a less taught skill. Certainly from a healing perspective, depending upon the roles that you all are in, it's probably a skill that you're aware of or something that you may already have a practice of. But what I found is that being able to blend or go with activation or a contraction that shows up in my body also offers the opportunity, sometimes for a different kind of healing, sometimes for an experience of moving through to the other side of something. Or sometimes just gives me some additional information that puts me rather in a state of fight or resist or kind of be against my own body's contraction, my own body's activation, to give me a chance to kind of be more in relationship with it. So we're going to go ahead and do that kind of a practice for a couple minutes here to give you a sense of the contrast as well as how you might work with this in your own life. And I'm just checking for questions here as well. I'm seeing a couple things. Social domain. Okay, to respond to the question from the last piece here, it looks like dignity line top to bottom, we often speak about as dignity in terms of the three pieces. The side to side, we'll say often the social domain. Depth front to back, there's different ways that we work with this. So we also will often include the insides, and then depth can be like the depth of your being, what's housed in there, but also depth front to back. We'll often speak about the back related to past, to history, to people at your back, even to where you come from, essentially, and then the front having often a relationship with where you're going, the future, what's ahead, these kinds of things, and many more. So we work with all of these aspects of ourself being able to be included in the context of our centering and our centered presence. I'm also seeing a question here from Mark. Yeah, different levels and intensities. Mark, I want to come back to that, if you don't mind, after we do the next practice. In short, what I'll say there is from a practice perspective, and this is really much more of a rule of thumb than, this is true or all the time so. But in my own experience, in my own practice, and when working with clients, often the higher level of activation, perhaps the more likely that you'll need something different than a simple recentering practice. And this next piece that I'm going to do with you around blending with or going with activation or contraction can be another move from a practitioner perspective or from a self-practice perspective that can be helpful when activation is higher. Or it's not as easy to simply recenter out of activation. And that may not be exactly your question, but just giving you a sense that that's why I want to give you this next practice before we complete today. Let's take a moment. We'll stand up again. And once again, letting yourself find just reconnection with yourself in practice, in body here. And like we started last time, I want to invite you to first start from a neutral place if that feels true for you right now or wherever you're at right now. And then go ahead and choose again. Could be the same thing we started with last time or something different. An experience in the last week, couple of weeks, where you felt activation in your body. You can bring that into your mind's eye. Again, maybe not choosing a 10, the hardest thing or the most intense thing that you felt, but something more like a 5 or 6. Good. And then as you do that, allowing yourself to feel the feelings, feel the sensations. This was my moment. Here's what it was like. And kind of calling on our imagination, our memory, to give us a chance to represent or recreate that a little bit right now. Good. And then as you do this, really bringing your awareness to where you feel that activation. Could be in the form of tension, could be in the form of more like an emotion or a sensation. Where in your body are you sensing that most? Yeah, and then letting yourself attend without trying to change that spot, that place. So bringing a gentle and intentional awareness and presence to that, as if you were attending to maybe a child that you cared about or someone you loved. Good. And again, without trying to change it, just noticing what's happening as you attend to it. See if you can offer some acceptance, maybe curiosity. To that part of you. If it feels good or like it wants to, you can let it do what it's doing just a little bit more. You may notice that it starts to shift or change, or something else happens. That's fine. You can go with that, or just stay with it. And if you want, you can ask it a question. What do you need? What do you want me to know? It may or may not answer. And just giving it some space, some time. Make it louder or quieter. It may not have anything to say, or it might. Good, and you may notice that your body wants to shift or change or do something else. If so, you can let that happen. If not, keep doing the same thing for another moment or two, attending, offering care, acceptance. If it feels helpful or good, you could put your hand on that spot. Mostly we're just creating an invitation for it to do what it wants to do. Or show what it might want to show. Okay. Wherever wherever you are in your process right now, go ahead and, again, if it feels good, place a hand on that spot you've been working with. And take a couple deeper breaths. It may be that your process is or is not complete, or maybe not much happened. All good. Okay. And if your process doesn't feel complete, you can let that place in you know, if this is true, that you'll come back to it, that you'll give it a little more time, maybe later today or later this week, if it seems to want that. Good, and then let's go ahead and come back. So this is a really basic, simple, basic but not easy, simple but not easy, beginning of a blend practice. So really giving you one more option of how to work with or be with activation in the body. And like I mentioned already, this can really be, just an opportunity to attend to not fight with or resist, to let that activation teach you or show you something. If you'd like to put in the chat something about what you experienced there or what opened for you or what you learned there, go ahead and do that. And in life, back in life, outside of this moment, this practice, this kind of a blend can look like, again, just putting attention, offering gratitude or acceptance, breathing into it, having a cry, letting yourself get mad and punching a punching bag or a pillow, letting somebody hold you, can show up in the context of getting body work, if that's something you have access to. Yeah, a couple things in the chat. Activation seemed to soften and shift. Anger softened into sadness. Listening as opposed to resisting. Great. Okay. Tip of the iceberg, everyone. Thanks for being here. And I think Salunas is going to share a bit more with us about how you can go deeper if something showed up here for you that you'd like to work with more.
Thanks so much, LeeAnn. That was a beautiful practice. So we do have some courses coming up. One that LeeAnn is leading in the end of this month, right? So March 25th through the 28th is the Embodied Leadership Level 1 course. It's in person in Petaluma, California. Also, on March 13th, we will begin a two-weekend retreat with Richard Strozzi called Embodying the Mystery. So that's also inside the chat. You can sign up for that. You have a couple of days to catch that course. And then for those who've already completed the prerequisite, which is the Embodied Leadership Level 1 course, we have the cohort, the spring cohort for the Somatic coaching program opening up on April 29th. And that's also the first session will be April 29th in Petaluma, California. If you have questions, I put a link to my appointments as well as the email of Ben Schick, who handles our organizational and company solutions. So if you have any questions or want to bring us into your companies, you can do so by emailing him. With that, thank you all so much for joining us.